simple test. Pick up the...
Okay.
Well, the thing I've got here, in 1989, I've got a short story and the remarks of the true story and facts, as I'm a grandson of my grandfather and grandmother Venable, Richard Thomas Venable and Elizabeth Bennett. My grandfather was born on the 27th of February 1852 at Montgomery, Missouri. He died the 1st of December 1915 in Ogden, Weber County, Utah. My grandmother was born the 15th of April 1852 at Pottawatomie, Iowa. She died the 28th of November 1941 in Ogden, Weber County, Utah. And the first Venables that I was really acquainted with was the Sandra Venable, because she won't want to go into that. These people that I've shown you the picture here of my grandparents were pioneers of Syracuse, among the first settlers of Syracuse. To make Syracuse of what it is today, along with others, there wasn't too many of them in there when they first settled Syracuse, you know. I guess you got information on that. The first settlers that I remember, I was 12 years old, and I was in their home and grew up there in their home. And as I remember Syracuse, they were good farmers, and the people that lived in there were some stokers. There was the Galeys, the Galey of Dave Galey. He was our old coal supplier. He did furnish us our coal to heat with. There was a lot of stokers, not too many stokers in there, and their Barneses, they owned quite a lot in there, and of course they played quite a part. They built a cannery in there. There was a Hamlins, Richard Hamlin up there. He would run the slaughterhouse and the meat market, and he run a route going around peddling meat at that time.
Where did he have his shop, Venable?
Right there in front of his house. His house is right up above where the track goes up by there. The old Hamlin home, his home's still there. Well, he had a little shop right out towards the street, right there in the front by the street.
That'd be on 700 South,
Yeah.
and just west of 1000 West.
Yeah, that was where he had his market and his store. And then he had a slaughterhouse. If you're going up the other way, going north, he had a slaughterhouse up towards the railroad, where the railroad track is at. And he had a slaughterhouse there.
And he had a route he covered.
He had what?
A route.
Oh yeah, he peddled around with people. And he cut meat and wrapped it and had it already packed in his outfit.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of cooks, not too many cooks. There was some cooks around in there. There were steeds. There was a few steeds and Thurgood's and Walker's, the old Walker store, Dave Walker.
Right.
Yeah, he was the only store we had, really. And then we had down from my grandfather's house, there was a fellow by the name of Pete Critterson. He was there, and he was the county health man. He's the one that when you had the diseases, he'd come and tack that little red quarantine sign on your house, and you was pinned. You was in there. We had the Ramptons, old George Rampton. He lived up just from the church where it is now. He had a blacksmith shop there, and he done blacksmith work. You couldn't go here and there and all over, and you had to go where there was. And there were some Holtz and name Cowan and But Syracuse was mostly farming, and it was broken up out of sagebrush, but it was the best farm ground I believe there was in the world all through that country, and it still is. And well, I don't know. What kind of information you want? You have.
Was your grandfather, was he the postmaster, or did he deliver the post, the mail?
I think he just had the post office for a while in his home. He didn't deliver mail. There wasn't no mail delivery that I remember. And of course they took the post office out by the time I got up to 12 years old. I didn't see the post office he had in his house at all. His first house was made of it was made of logs. And then later on, why Syracuse didn't have no school, and so he built him a house, and they had that, used that for a schoolhouse for a while.
Grade school?
Until it was one-room house, or one-room schoolroom, and of course then when they got community started to get organized, well, they built a school, that first school down there.
Mm-hmm.
But the first school was held in that little old log cabin. And later on, as I was a boy, then he turned that there into an ice house. He put up ice, and winter time it was full of sawdust and ice. And us kids used to go down there and dig down in the sawdust and chip off a hunk of ice, and it was pretty nice place to be. And then when he done away with that, he turned it back into kind of a barn outside.
Did they have a nickname for the school, Venable School, or any other
I don't
referred to, just grade school?
There wasn't much. I don't even know how Syracuse got its first name, really. But, I know it was a good farming community, and then when I got up about where I could remember, 5, 6 years old, I can remember that, but he took on, given my father a 10-acre strip up on the east end, along the east side of his farm. And so my dad built a house there, and that's where we lived. Mm-hmm. And my granddad lived about a quarter of a mile on west down, further down.
Do you know where Lauren Thurgood lived?
Over in Syracuse?
Yeah, he'd be on that street. I wondered where your original home was in relation to about where Lauren is, or where it was along that street.
Well, our original home, there, that spur that goes up through there, was about 300 feet on the east
side of it.
And then Rich Hamlin owned, his home was across the street, just about a couple of 100 feet on the other side of the road. And I don't know really what you want to know, really.
Well, hey, you're doing great.
You're telling us just what we want.
You bet.
Dave Gailey's, his was down on the street, pretty near the corner, and he had a family, and he owned that coal yard, and his coal yard was over by that spur that goes down where the old Barnes factory was. And of course they was quite a asset to Roy at that time, or Syracuse at that time, because Barnes come in there and put that tomato factory up, and of course that let a big outlet for the farmers around there. But my grandfather, he didn't go too much on that kind of stuff. He had a lot of livestock, and he raised lots of grain, and as we went down, I remember when we were riding the header. Well, people don't know what a header is anymore. And so I was about 12 years old at that time. And we got to go down there at thrashing time, and I'd go out on the header with my granddad. You know what a header is?
Well, a little, tell us what
it
it
is.
is.
It was before the combines come in, you know, the first headers they had. They used to, it was a wide machine about 12 foot wide. With the cutter bar was about 12 foot wide. And then there was a pole come down through the middle, and back in here there was another wheel that had a rudder come up, and it had a rudder, and they straddled that. And they had one team of horses on each side, two teams, to run it. Well, whenever they wanted to turn it, they turn it with his feet. And there's a little platform on this, and there was just one wheel down underneath there. And it had a belt that come along back that had a big reel on the front that turned. And this had knocked the grain down on this here conveyor belt, and it run over, and then it had a chute that come up about 10, 12 foot long with another one that goes carried up. Well, they had header boxes on wagons, and the one side was low, to about 2 foot high, and the other side was higher. And there was one man get in there, and he'd load the grain. And then they'd come and cut, and when he'd get a load, why, there'd be another one pull in. And then they'd haul it into the stacks, and they'd stack it all up, stack it. And then, of course, when they thrashed it, they'd put a stack here and a stack here, and make them about, not too big, we're kind of about 20 foot diameter, round, and leave a little hole through the middle so the thrasher could come move down and have this platform down that they throw the grain in to thrash. But that's what a header was. And then later on it come into the fact that they had the combine, and of course they bundled them up and tied the bundles, and you'd have to shock them up and load them up and haul them, stack them in for the thrasher. But this was the first method. The headers was the main fact in all grain farming. Well, he raised lots of, he had about 5,000 sheep, I imagine. He had quite a few sheep, and he had some cattle, and some hay, and a lot of grain. But he was a successful farmer. He was always a ambitious guy. He was going all the time. He never made a measure of milk too many cows, but he had, of course, he's old enough for his own use. But he had a team of horses, I guess. Well, I've heard him say that team was the biggest team in Davis County at that time. Mm-hmm. And his names was Frank and Dan, I believe. But anyway, they was a good team. He thought the world of them. And but when he had a picture or a pasture, and when they got so they couldn't work, why, he retired them and kept them till they died. They had 2 horses. But he was a great farmer, and of course Barnes's, they had a quarter section on the other side of the street, and now they raised nothing but grain. And my granddad raised a lot of pigs too, and me and my cousin, we were herding pigs out there in their grain fields. After they cut the grain, well, we'd herd the pig farm. Mm-hmm. But when he retired, well, he left that and he sold it to a realtor, and I think it was called the name of Walker Realtor or something. And anyway, he turned around, and I think he sold that place to Thurgood, didn't he?
I think Lauren.
Lauren Thurgood. And then they tore the place down and built to what you see today there.
Where did you graze your sheep in the summer? You said you had, what, 5,000 head of sheep?
Well, he sent them up in the hills somewhere. He had a fellow, I don't know whether he was up there with him, but he had quite a few sheep and all kinds of. It was open country then. It wasn't like it is now. You didn't. But it was quite. And then the school, we used to go. We was right on the borderline. We lived right on the borderline of Clearfield and Syracuse. So we had a chance to go to eat a place. So we went to Clearfield to church all the time, and we went to Syracuse to school. We walked down to the school. It was about a mile and 3/4 down to the school. And the first school that they built down there, then they tore that down and remodeled that about just before we moved out of there and went to Idaho. And I went to school about 3 months in that new school that they remodeled. But it had a ball field there. And the ladies toilet over on one corner and the men's on the other, and that was your toilet facilities and all. But it was. And then they remodeled again on the Syracuse school after that too.
Did they have water in the building or a fountain out back or for drinking water?
No, I don't think that. I think the first one was that they had just the cup business. But then they finally put the water in this building. Old Dan Walker's store, he was over a little farther, and he used to always go there and get her stuff. It was our mainstay of that.
You have any memories of school or some of your teachers or activities?
Well, I remember my activity, my first school. I started school there when I was in first grade. I had a school teacher by the name of Miss Abrams. She was a quite heavy-set woman. She looked like a big woman to me because I was a little kid. But she was really a nice teacher. I remember her, but her name was Abrams, Miss Abrams. And we used to play ball and had lots of the Cook brothers, Joe Cook and Noel Steed and all them there. We had a good ball team and we played ball all the time. Those were school days. But people started moving in and building around a little bit, not too much. The farms didn't broke up too much. It was a farming district. That's really what it was. And of course, they had the canal. They come in a little earlier than that. They had irrigating water. Oh, I don't know. There's been so many changes. If you're talking about Roy, I can give you a lot of history. But I moved out of Syracuse. I was 12 years old when my dad didn't have enough ground, and it was all taken up. People had their farms, and they wouldn't split a farm up then and sell much ground. You had to buy a big place. So that was when the boom was coming in Idaho and around in Burley. And so he decided to go up there, and he rented a farm up there. And I was about 12 years old then when we moved out of Syracuse and went up to Burley. when we got up there, it wasn't, well, I was there 2 years. My mother wasn't feeling very good at all that time, and she got sick, and he was farming 160 acres up there, and she died. And so he had to move back to Ogden. Didn't have no place, no, there wasn't no facilities at that time for to get any help, and he had his family, and so he moved back down here, and this, my grandmother, I went and lived with her. And I was 14 years old then, so I spent a lot of time in with her, and went to school there in Ogden. And when I got older, well, I got my jobs, and worked the railroad, and I worked American Pack. But Syracuse is, there's a lot of history to Syracuse. It's a good community. You shouldn't have no trouble getting history for that.
We appreciate what you're contributing and your help. Because we didn't have anything on your grandparents at all with this week, you know, we appreciate it.
Have any thing? What?
We didn't have any history on your grandparents, and so we appreciate getting that information.
Well, you've got that there in this here. I've got a history in here. How they come to Syracuse.
Yes.
So we appreciate that. Wonder if we could get a picture of your grandparents, if you just held it, and let me zero in on it and get it on the cam recorder. I'll need to.
Well, I was, when these pictures was taken, that's when their family was in, so I'd be about, it'd be about when I was about 16 years old, and these is my grandparents. I don't know whether you could get much of a picture off of that or not.
Turn your grandmother's, there's a little light flickering on it. That's better right there. There. That's better. Okay, I think we got them.
I have a good history here that I've got for you that of my grandmother.
Good.
She was a Bennett, and you know the Bennetts is people. Elizabeth Bennett Venable was born the 15th of April, 1852, at Potawatomi, Iowa. But she was the daughter of James Bennett and Ellen Pincock. Her parents embraced the gospel of Jesus Christ in church when Elizabeth was a baby of 6 weeks old. And they started the long trip across the plains from Iowa to Utah. There were many hardships they encountered while crossing the plains. As a girl, the many trials she went through with her parents made her a strong character. She grew up with the knowledge of the gospel, which she loved and lived as near as she could while on this earth. At the age of 24, she married Richard Thomas Venable on October the 10th, 1876. At this reunion, 8 children were born, mainly James Andrew, Charles Richard, that was my father, and Susanna Ellen, that was Rich Hamlin's wife, Elgin Marvin, Martha Isabel, Wealthy, Lawrence Henry, May Elizabeth. She also raised one adopted child, Cora Villate King. And the early part of her married life began in Kaysville, when they lived but a short time. Leaving there, they moved to Syracuse, where they homesteaded 160 acres. Her first home was at Syracuse, was a one-room house made of logs. She could be said of her pioneer life that she was one of the very deed. She loved the beautiful flowers, her garden, and the joy of her life. Never you visited at her home where she was always a new bud of blossoms she would have you look at, and before you went home, whether inside or out. She was a widow for the last 26 years of her life, and at the time helped with the care of her motherless grandchildren. Well, that's the ones I was telling you about. My father lost his when she had two, and her son had two that come and live with her, and she raised them. Her one desire was to be able to wait upon herself always. I've often heard her say, I do not want to sit around and rest out. This was granted, and she was able to do and be up and around 2 weeks before her death, even though her eyesight was growing dim. But that's a little history of her.
Good.
Good.
Now, let me understand the relationship between Venables and the, on the north side,
Hamlin's?
Hamlins.
Well, Rich Hamlin's wife was my father's sister.
Your father's sister.
Yeah, that was Susie, the one she's talking about here, Suzanne.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, and of course in the other Hamlins, there was old Richard Hamlin. He lived for about a mile up the street again, and he raised lots of berries and fruit and stuff like that. My grandfather was a man of medium height, about 5 foot tall, and he weighed about 190 pounds. He had a light complexion and light brown hair. He wore a mustache. He was an ambitious man with the kind of a disposition that was always ready to help someone in need. He usually carried his own part and half of someone else's. He owned and operated a grain header and a thrasher. Well, I've already told you about that. He was the royal. Oh, well, it goes on and talks about my grandmother. I don't know, I should have had time, if I'd have knew what you were really after, I could have got you a more precise history.
You do this just great.
It was quite an interesting thing that when my grandmother and grandfather got married, Richard Thomas, the oldest, was 15 years old, and that was my granddad there. And of course he had to find some work, so he went up to Barnes's, and that was the Barnes Banking Company from Barnes's. And so they took him in, and they lived with them in Kaysville. They were about to attend school and worked out for his board and keep. While he was thus employed, he met and encountered a lovely young lady by the name of Elizabeth Bennett. Grandmother told me the story of her marriage. Things were not convenient as they are today, and preparations had to be made. They went on the train to Salt Lake City the night before the wedding and were married in the old endowment house. You heard of the old endowment house. On October the 10th, 1876. After the wedding, they returned to Kaysville, where they made their first home. Their first child, James Andrew, was born. Then they were 6 months old. When he was 6 months old, they moved to Syracuse to take up a homestead. Syracuse at the time was a very hot and desolate place. Nothing but sagebrush and grass and hills and no water. Grandfather homesteaded a half section of land. It was necessary to build a house to live in, So he took his team and wagon and went into the hills to cut logs and haul them down to make a dwelling. His first house was built 16 foot square, and the roof was made of clay. It was a dirt roof for some time. Neighbors were Richard Hamlin lived about 3 miles east of them. He didn't have a house at that time. He lived in a dugout. Alma Stoker lived about 1 mile south, and where there were a few other settlers scattered about the area. After the cabin was built, Grandfather began to break up ground around the plant, planted it into wheat. The first year's harvest was before they was able to build any outbuildings, as they built a bin in one corner of the house to protect their crop. However, they needed anything from town. They would take a sack or two of grain and sell it at the mill in Ogden. Grandmother had said times were hard for those first few years. Drinking water presented a major problem. They had to haul the water in barrels, either from Layton or Hooper, Utah. Either way, it was a distance of about 10 miles. Grandfather tried to dig a well. He dug down 54 feet deep without any curbing and found it to be just as hard and dry as it was on top. So he had to give it up. Another year or two of hauling water with his spirit to make another attempt to digging well. He got some lumber from the sawmill in Weber Canyon, which was called Cottonwood Canyon. He used it as a curbing. He dug the well 95 feet deep, and as I was a boy, I remember drawing many buckets of water out of that well. But
That's pretty deep, isn't it, to dig it by
Oh, that is.
hand? Can you imagine that?
well, they had the thing built on the top, and it had that pulley with the two buckets. Buckets held about 2 gallons of water, and there was old made. I guess they called them the old oaken buckets. I don't know, but there was two, and you pull one up, full of water, and the empty one would go down, and you pull it the other way and bring it up. It is nice water, I tell you. But I wasn't born when he built his log cabin, but I do know that when he had his house built, before I come in the picture, it was about, I was about 6, 7 years old before I remember their home. I was in the home a lot of times from then on. He had a nice home then, but then he had that same home until that's the one that Thurgood tore down and built the home that he's in now. But Syracuse has got a lot of stories. If you could get around and get all the history of Syracuse, it was a good, thriving community. It's good ground. Of course, Clearfield come into the picture, and Clearfield had good ground too. But that's where the Navy Supply come in and built all that.
Some of the best ground that was there, wasn't it, where the Naval Supply Depot went in?
Well, I don't know. It wasn't any better than the other, I don't think.
Good ground, though.
Yeah. And further, of course, the early history, I've heard them having where they had that there resort down on the lake. The early comers in there, they had that. But it's, you might say that Syracuse has been a thriving farming community. Now it's thriving with homes.
Yeah.
They're coming in and taking all over, and I don't know whether they'll even raise enough to eat if they keep going and building houses.
Makes you wonder.
Of course, the Japs, they say that American people are crazy. They could dig up their lawns and raising us stuff to eat on all the time. But, there was quite a few Japanese come into Syracuse and farmed, wasn't there, later?
Yes.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. If I knew really what you had to have, but
Well, I think it's been very interesting. You have any questions?
No, it's been very good. This is all good information. We appreciate it. There ought to be more questions, but I can't place any right now.